Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, or wherever you're watching this podcast from. Welcome to the Network for Financial Crime Prevention, our podcast. And today's title is Revolutionizing KYC and Screening, Efficiency, Innovation, and Passion, where we will explore the evolving landscape of compliance, management, and the fight against financial crime. My name is Louis Vargas, and I'm the founder of NFCP, the Network for Financial Crime Prevention. And I'm thrilled to have Sune Warberg Clausen, who is the VP of Financial Crime Prevention Services and Customer Service at Avallone, a company that's transforming how financial institutions approach know your customer processes and screening. With deep expertise in financial crime prevention and a vision for more efficient, intelligent, and compliant systems, Sune is at the forefront of revolutionizing an industry that's critical to the integrity of our global financial system. But first, before we hand over the mic to him, I just want to do some quick housekeeping. If you're not a member of NFCP, you can sign up via our website, which is www.nfcp.info. You can also follow us on LinkedIn and subscribe to our Apple Podcast, Spotify, or YouTube channels. Our community exists for you, those that work in the risk, compliance, and fin crime areas in any industry. And keep in mind, we are only sharing our personal thoughts, and in no way this should be taken as legal advice. So again, today's conversation will dive into the challenges facing traditional KYC and screening methods, and it will explore how technology is reshaping compliance workflows and discuss what the future holds for financial crime prevention. Whether you're a compliance professional, fintech innovator, or simply curious about how the financial world protects itself from illicit activity, this episode offers invaluable insights. Sune, welcome to the show.
Thank you, and thank you for the presentation, and thank you for having me here.
Yeah, it's been a long time coming. We've been working on this for some time. So again, I appreciate you joining us and sharing a bit more about yourself and your insights.
Looking forward to it.
And just a bit of apology, I have a bit of a cold, so if I sound more nasally than usual, or I go off camera for a minute, is maybe to blow my nose. So I don't want to, maybe people think I'm escaping, but yeah, I'm just want to bear you the sight of me blowing my nose. But yes, thank you all for your patience. So Sune, you've had a fascinating career in financial crime prevention. How did you first get interested in this field?
Yeah, so it was actually not on purpose. I think that goes for many people working within ML, right? So I started my career in a bank in Denmark, EG Bank, that was bought by Danske, like advising of mainly private individuals, but also smaller companies. I was a manager and worked with that for 13 years. And then I thought I would want to try something else. And then there was a new first-line risk function that was kind of being created in the bank. And I applied for that and got a job in that position, that team. The idea was not to work so much with AML, but more with operational risk in general. But it seems like that kind of this AML was just growing and growing and growing, and it ended up with me coming into working on it full time. Yeah, not chosen, but I'm really happy I ended here. So that's great.
I could definitely, I guess sympathize maybe with that, because that happened also with me, where I was looking for a job and I kind of pivoted into it, and now, it's been more than 10 years. So I definitely see how that happens.
It is a bit like when you first are caught into this area, it's difficult to get out again.
Yeah, and kind of piggybacking on that kind of line of thought, what was your aha moment that made you realize that this was the area you wanted to focus on?
I think it came a bit step by step, but quite early in this new department I was working in, we got the Danish MLOs, or the people who was kind of investigating reporting SARS into our team. And that was quite fascinating about what they could tell about what they were doing and the investigation they were doing and stuff like that. So I think that's kind of the first time I really paid attention to the discipline. And then a bit later, I got the task to build an entirely training program for everybody. First in Danske Bank in Denmark, and so later we brought it out to the entire group. Kind of there, I really start digging into the area and try to understand what was behind it and all that I find really interesting. And then it was just like more tasks coming in, and we're getting more of it, right?
Awesome. And with KYC and screening, it can be seen as dry or bureaucratic by some people. To me, it's kind of the fundamentals and where everything is driven from. So to me, it's very important, but it seems like other people don't see it that way. What excites you about this work, and how do you stay motivated?
So I think, first of all, biggest role that where I did kind of the most work in Danske Bank, it was on the SAP reporting and investigations, alert handling and all that. And I could really see in that job that without proper KYC, which I think a lot of financial institutions is still lacking. So they have the KYC, but the quality of it is also important. And lack of quality in KYC just made investigation extremely difficult, and it also meant that doing a lot of work we didn't have to do, and at the same time also reporting a lot of SARS that maybe could have been avoided if we had a bit more information. So I think that when working with investigation and SARS reporting, I really noticed that KYC is kind of the center of everything that we are doing within this discipline, whether it's transaction monitoring or risk assessment or whatever. And I think it's a bit the same with the screening part. So I think it's a slightly different discipline. I've worked a lot with it in Avallone, not so much in the bank, but again, strong KYC can make it so much more convenient to do screening, alert handling, right? So I think the whole sanctions area is of course extremely important, and it becomes even more important with what's happening in the world at the moment, but also because the threshold of making a mistake is so low, right? So in that sense, it is extremely interesting and really important. And I think we tend to forget it, but from my point of view, KYC and screening goes really hand in hand.
And you mentioned sanctions, and I'm just curious from your perspective, when we're talking about sanctions and financial crime prevention, how do you see that that's evolved over the years that you've been in the field?
So I think it's and people working with sanctions know even more than me on this, right? But it isn't. But first of all, it's a very rapidly evolving area, right? With especially when Russia go into Ukraine, it's like it exploded in Europe, right? But I think in general, we see more and more sanctions enforced, which makes it more and more difficult to work with. And what we see from Avallone side is that a lot of customers who didn't think about so much in screening and KYC and stuff like that, they also do it today, even though they're not AML regulated. So I think sanction screening becomes more and more kind of one of the key and core things of financial crime prevention. I guess it has been all the time, but it just becomes more and more, and it becomes more and more difficult to really understand how to work with it. Right? More specialists is needed in that area, definitely.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we can't have enough. The budgets don't allow it, so we have to continuously find ways to do more with less. It seems like that's the trend. And, I guess that's where a lot of the work you're doing with Avallone comes in, right? Because it's not only trying to help with the issues of, automating a lot of these controls and processes, but it's trying to figure out ways where technology could step in, and then the human could kind of still be in the loop, but it doesn't need to take as much humans, right?
No, right. And I think it's also for us in Avallone, it's also make it accessible for people who didn't really work with it before. Because I think one thing is it's easy to get a screening provider, right? It's easy to set something up and start screening entities. But the big problem comes in, first of all, understanding what's a true match and what's a not true match, and kind of doing that investigation, knowing when is enough and enough, when is what to do. And then again, kind of understanding that it's not enough to have a company name. You also need to kind of explore all the relevant entities that's related to that company. And at the same time, you also need information enough, so that I would say that's the KYC information, right, to kind of really determine if what you're looking at is a true positive or not. So I think step one is just to understand the whole alert handling, which can be difficult for a lot. I think most people understand collecting a passport and some documents. I'm not saying that's what KYC only is, but it's like, I think for many it's easier to understand what KYC is and then exactly screening and alert handling. And then if there is a potential match, then you, especially if it's a sanction, that's really some other things to think about, right? So
Yeah, it's true. I think, when we think about maybe larger institutions, they might be already a bit more mature and they already understand what it takes to have a program in place, a compliance program in place. But when you talk about these smaller firms, not financial institutions, some of them are still in the dark when it comes to these things. So it's good that they could have a partner like you to really help them along. Because as you said, there are a lot of companies out there that just sell products and serve and not so much the services part, but a real, I guess, bang for your buck is getting that expertise to understand what exactly you're doing and the purpose behind it, because then that will help them longer down the road than just the technology part.
yeah, so I think what you allude to is that we are, first of all, Avallone is a software company trying to build customers, but we also acknowledge at some point that not every people have the in-house knowledge to kind of run these processes. So we kind of offering to help them to do that with some managed services, right? But I think the point is also that, especially if you are a smaller company or not as a mature company, maybe you only have one person, maybe one and a student helper to kind of run these processes. It should be the person who's both extremely strong at building a framework, doing risk assessments, do policies and all that, but at the same time, being really good and like to do alert handling from screening. That's a big range, right? And I think it's difficult to find people who enjoy doing all of that. So sometimes it can be more efficient to get some help for some of the more easy lifting. It could also be the other way around, right? It help to do the more heavy lifting. But yeah, I think if you're not having a big team, it's a big area to kind of.
Yeah, for sure. And talking about all those challenges that organizations might have with KYC and screening, but also, why it's so critical. I'm just curious, from what you've seen in the different roles you've had, especially now at Avallone, what are some of the biggest pain points that you see the companies facing today?
Yeah, it's of course differs from company to company, but I think in general we see that it's still a discipline that is not that well established on the technology side. It's not because there's a lot of vendors out there, but I think we still see a lot of companies handling this in spreadsheets and Word documents and PDF files and emails and stuff like that. So I think this would kind of have one place to organize it all is definitely something that people are struggling with. GDPR is also important here, right? So it's like all these passports and sensitive documents that you're getting from your counterparties, where to store that and how to make sure that it's deleted on the right time and it's not going to the wrong people and stuff like that. I think also we see just more and more executives asking what is happening with my passport and my information. Please tell me who you're sharing it with, which will be very difficult for the most part. So I think that's one thing that's kind of organizing and have a place for it. But then I think it's also how to communicate with your counterparties, how to make it as easy so you don't have a lot of fall from back. I think most working with KYC knows that one of the biggest struggle is to get the replies in and get them in sufficient time. Having a lot of interaction, so you get a reply and then there will be a lot of fall from back. So what we have, and I think that's actually one of the reasons why Avallone was established, like seeing that model was kind of broken. We saw a lot of companies doesn't really think that it's their task to help banks to get a lot of information, but it is, right? So what we tried with Avallone, or what we're doing with Avallone, is trying to make that communication much easier and having fewer interactions. So I think that's definitely also a thing. And then it's of course also how to kind of connect the screening things with KYC and kind of maturing the whole process. So I think that was probably the main thing that I would mention.
And I guess to continue on with one of the threads that you're pulling on there is the lack of sometimes responses on KYC requests. So how do you balance the need for compliance with the desire to create a seamless customer experience?
Yeah. So, and I think that's a good question. It's also one of the things that I enjoy with not being in a bank anymore is that when I was in the bank, I was very much talking to people who kind of have the same kind of skill set as I had and kind of the same approach. I know, of course, there's also internal differences in the bank, but here it's like, I know a lot about this discipline. I have a certain way of thinking about it, but then we also have, we have a product manager, we have tech people, and they think a bit slightly different. So I think it gives a lot of good discussion about, is that really needed, or is that just our own thinking? And then I think that kind of gives us better solutions. But when that is said, I also think that we are very mindful on that it has to follow standards for compliance, because it is a area where people have strong beliefs, and we need to be sure that we can accommodate that one.
No, for sure. It's definitely a balance. But, even if we're considering the customer experience, like as you mentioned, we can't forget about the compliance requirements, even though we don't maybe want to bother the customer, but we have to ask the right questions. And that's something you also mentioned, is asking the right questions. And I think that's key, right? Because what I've also seen in a lot of the banks I work for is that they don't really ask targeted questions, right? So it could just be the same script of questions to everybody, whether you're individual or an entity. And then those customers are getting frustrated because they're like, why am I answering these questions? Because they don't pertain to me. Or even questions that might be of a concern to certain compliance teams, but it should be to maybe a certain customer class or segment. And instead you're giving it to everyone. And they're like, but I don't even know how to answer that question. And then when they don't, they have KYC units coming back to answer every question. So, I think that's also, part of it when we talk about the customer experience, is figuring out, it's not that we shouldn't ask questions, but asking the right questions, asking targeted questions, and then ensuring that the information is available, to whomever needs it. Because then what happens if you have certain questions being asked, but the rest of instead, that your corporation or organization doesn't see it, then you're asking the questions again, and then that's also frustrating to the customer. So I think that's, maybe a way of balancing it, is asking the right question, make sure that it's targeted, and then make sure that the responses are seen by the organization. But it sounds simple when we're talking together, but in practice, it could be very difficult, especially if you're talking about a large organization.
No, I fully agree, and I think this with the target questions is definitely a thing, right, to work with. But I think also, and I'm aware there's data protections rules and all that, but I think, and I hope that over time you will be much better in the entire sector for this area to kind of also understand that this information can be used broadly. You don't need to have it like one silo called KYC. And, that's only what you're focusing on. I think there's a lot of things. A lot of these things, for example, financial institution is asking customer about in an onboarding, also makes sense from an advisory point of view, right? So I think it's probably already happening, right? But I think we can much more better to kind of feel the value as a customer to reply to these questions. So it's not just like kind of something they have to do to get their account right.
And this is, problems I've had during my career, is that, especially when you talk about screening, it's like, okay, what is absolutely essential for screening is one thing, right? And then there's also another question of what's absolutely necessary for KYC, right? Because they're not always the same. And then because, as you mentioned, we're in silos, they might say, well, sanctions team, what questions you want? And we say what we want, right? And then the AML teams, what you want, fraud, what you want. And there are some questions that go throughout, but they keep them, but because we're siloed, sometimes they keep it compartmentalized, where then, those answers could be helpful for the other units, but they don't necessarily receive those responses or get to review them. Or even sometimes this also happened to me, where I could say, well, we need maybe this data point, or there's a question that is valuable for everybody, but they say, well, KYC will come back and say, well, either they don't agree, or they would say, well, now we need approval from all the other areas. And it's like, oh my gosh, it takes so long to just get these processes. And it's like, it should be common sense. But yeah, I'm not sure if you have those, have it.
I think that happens in all financial institutions, right? It's large organization. There's so much different views on what's important and what's not important. So I think that's kind of natural. It happens, right? And that's frustrating. That's one of the perks with being in a startup, is that there's much fewer people to discuss with before you make changes, right? So,
yeah.
But
Sure.
I think the truth in that is that we need to get better on that, right? To move faster, but also to kind of make sure that we know why we are collecting stuff and how we use it. Because I think that comes back to my thinking about the the investigation and the SAR filing is that maybe there is full KYC information, but it's not really explained right. So yeah, maybe there is transactions to a certain country, but I don't know why. So I can't really assess if what the slight change there is now, does that make sense in the context of what the customer is doing? So I think it's also very much about when we talk about KYC, and I think that's kind of old school to always say it's not a checkbox exercise, right? But I think there's still a lot of it. So I think it's very much about for people who's kind of getting the KYC to really understand why we're getting it, what should we use it for, to make sure it's actually useful, right?
Definitely. I mean, that education of even just the KYC teams, I think is super important. That another thing I think gets overlooked. They just say, well, ask these questions, get the answers, and move on. It's like, no, but they should understand why they're asking these questions and why it's relevant. Yeah, so it also becomes a training and education part, even for the internal teams. 100% agree. To kind of continue on, I guess what you mentioned that Avallone is working on, but how do you think technology like AI and automation is changing the game for KYC and screening?
So I think AI will be a game changer. I think that's certain. I think Avallone has existed for soon 6 years, and what's possible today compared to when we started is huge step forward, right? And I think there's always been kind of talk about AI in AML that it's kind of black box. We don't know, where the results come from and all that, and that's not good. But I think we see with the new models, they're also starting to add in sources and stuff like that. So we got start understanding where information comes from. So when you look at just let's say KYC, so today you get some information. The customer put it in the questionnaire. That's kind of normal. Then you get some documents that kind of documenting what they put in the questionnaire, right? I think with AI, there's some really strong use cases where you can kind of say, hey, is there a similarity between what the document says and what they actually put in the questionnaire? So starting to kind of find the red flags. And the same with public data, right? I think the value of public data for some company, if they're not regulated, is lagging a bit with the beneficial owner data. But I think in general, there's a lot of good information there, and you can also use AI to start mapping out where's the differences. So I think that's a quite good use case. But I also think for sanction, or not for sanction, but screening in general, especially adverse media, actually, if you have strong KYC information and you get a lot of news story that could be potential matches, I think the KYC combined with the news stories and an AI model will be able to help you kind of remove much more noise than today, because it understands the articles. It's not just about there was a name that was like that. They can understand the article. They can look for much more things. So maybe you get the alert. You can use the AI to kind of highlight, what's the likelihood that this is actually a potential match or not, right? So again, I don't believe in that AI should make the decision when the first is an alert, but it could definitely help you with kind of showing, the likelihood, the red alerts and stuff like that. So I think there's a lot of things that will become much easier with AI, which also will make it all a bit more fun, because then you will start only focusing on the important stuff, right? I think the opportunity is to move KYC for something that's a lot of hard work to something that is much more risk focused, and maybe even with investigation, asking the right question, talking with the right stuff about customers.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, especially when you're talking about like the periodic review phase of KYC, because from what I've witnessed, a lot of banks struggle with that, right? They could get the customer onboarded, maybe to different, the success rate, I would say, fluctuates, but they get the customer onboarded. But when it comes to the periodic reviews, they put them off, they don't have enough people, and then there's a backlog. And like what I've also seen in the US is then the regulator comes in and says, why haven't you reviewed these files? Okay, now we're going to have a finding. And then they hire a ton of consultants to do them all at one shot. And then once that's done, they like, okay, we're safe. But then they let go of those consultants, and what happens? They repeat it. They don't do the periodic review in time. They get in trouble again. So I do think that I agree with you that AI will definitely help in that sense. Of course, there will still need a human in the loop, one to approve that information, but also have those conversations with the customers, right? Because KYC is not only about validating the information, but also getting updated information from the customer where that's not always available on the internet or whatever data provider you have. But at least a lot of the legwork is done. So then, as you said, people can have fun actually digging into a bit more and getting it over the line, whether it's approved or rejected.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
totally agree.
Yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that we do, our customer is appreciating, is to say, if we already have the information, maybe ask the customer to validate it instead of and again, because I think that's also what you as a counterparty sometimes find annoying is, hey, you should know that because I've been a customer of yours the last 5 years, right? So why do I have to put in my address again? And why should I tell you what product I'm using? Because it's kind of you selling with that product, right? So, and yeah, so I think that's also a thing that I hope we will see more and more, that actually we help our counterparties in that process so they can focus again on the important stuff.
I'm just curious, because you've talked about what Avallone has been doing and your part in that, could you give us an example of a success story of how, Avallone or yourself has helped the client transform their KYC process?
Yeah, so I would probably not name. I think several versions of companies that we have helped. We have had a company who was kind of starting from scratch. They were not regulated, but they were kind of want to act like a regulated company, right? So they didn't have the in-house competences, but they really knew that this is what we want to do. So first of all, it was kind of setting up first a very simple KYC process. Get started, collect some information, training their people in how to handle that coming in. Then we kind of helped them with doing the managed service on the sanctions, because it was like they didn't have any competences for that, so we could do that for them. And then they kind of later ended up with actually us helping them to design the full framework, writing the policies and getting everything in place, and also extending the KYC model. And the good thing with that approach, starting simple and then kind of build on, meant that they kind of within 6-8 months had a full-fledged KYC screening set up, right? Which I think can take very long for others. But with a simple approach, they were able to start KYC already within a month, right? And then they kind of could build on that. I think that's something I often say. Companies should not wait for perfect. They should just get started and then build, because it's better to do 70% KYC than 0% KYC. And then you can reach 100 later, right? So that could be. We also were, so another side of our product, one thing is collecting and screening. The other side of our product is replying to KYC and helping with that. And we are working together with a large NGO, which have the problem of getting funds into all these crisis areas of the world. And bank doesn't like that, right? When I was talking to them about how they were getting money into Syria or whatever it was in the world, I was just like, okay, you're using Havela's and all that, which I remember from my time in the bank was just like, it's a no-go, right? So kind of helping them using the platform to be more efficient, but also to kind of make sure that they give really strong answers to financial institutions so they understand what this is about and they don't have to kind of think about it every time something comes up, and thereby getting the money through the system as fast as it's needed, I think has been really, really, really cool to be a part of. So I think it's both kind of making it more efficient and smarter, but just as much as kind of growing maturity faster than you normally would.
Interesting. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And like you said, I mean, it varies between organizations, but yeah, thank you for kind of summarizing that, because it is a lot of work that goes into that, and there are a lot of successes, like you said, to kind of, get people to mature their program or just, help them onboard the technology that they're trying to in an efficient way. And as you said, sometimes just getting started is the problem. I've been with a lot of companies, as you have, where bureaucracy reigns, and you need to tick all the boxes before you could get started. And so sometimes you kind of have to take it almost like an ADHD approach. It's like, don't think about everything you have to do. Let's start with one step at a time. Let's get the little things done, and then you could, at the end, see that you've already now achieved so many things, and you don't have this big backlog awaiting you.
Yeah, exactly. I think, and a classic example is with a risk assessment, right? Where when people are starting with risk assessment, they're saying, hey, we should know all these things because then we can assess the risk. Where my argument will be, hey, start with finding all the data you already have and then use that. And then, when you start your KYC and collecting information, you get wiser, you get more data, and then you can kind of update your risk assessment based on new data. So it's not like you spend 2-3 years to kind of get all the data you think is needed, but actually use the data you already have, and then you start building on that.
Right. Cool. And now I'm going to switch gears a bit to maybe get a bit more of your personal insights on this, at least the last two questions I have. So the first one is, for someone just starting their career in financial crime prevention, what skills or mindsets do you think are most valuable?
I think the most valuable in my world is to be curious. It's a bit like, this would really try to understand what's happening. So I think that's a strong tool to have within AML. So kind of asking the right question, curiosing on why is this happening, how is it working right? And then I think analytic skills, whatever job you have, is kind of important, right? There's a lot of different jobs. I think also AML is not just one job, right? There's the KYC, there's the sanctions, that's the screening, that's building the policies and risk assessments, and there's transaction monitoring. We haven't talked about that, right? That's a major piece. So I think there's so many things that's interesting. Personally, I think have been working within the investigation and the reporting has been extremely rewarding, because it's also where you really see, why are we doing this? You can see it matters. Where sometimes if you start with KYC, which I think most people are doing, it's probably also where it's easy to come in from scratch, right? But it can be difficult to figure out, why are we doing this? Because every time something becomes a bit seriously, you escalate it to someone else. It could be another one, the KYC team, or to the SAR team, or whatever, right? So, but be curious and be analytics. I think that's kind of the strongest tools.
Yeah, well said. And because a lot of people you hear from today, it's like, I want to get into this field, but how do I do it? And above all the certifications you could think about or anything else, I agree. It's just about being curious and the analytical skills, because like you said, you learned, the policy and the procedures, but then it's digging into stuff, reading between the lines, the gut feeling sometimes you have when you're doing an investigation and you're like, well, I've done a lot of research and this is fine. Or you get to the point where you're like, no, there's really something wrong and I have to keep going. But it's a balance, definitely. And that comes with time and practice. And analytical skills will definitely help you along that journey.
I think somehow it's a very practical. It can also be theoretical, but I think it's a more practical. It's a risk discipline, right? It's more practical than some other disciplines, which I really like. That's also why I think certifications and stuff like that, I don't think that's where you become an ML officer. I think that's where maybe you get a language that kind of, you can talk to other people who's professional because you have the same language around it, right? But I think to really learn to work with it, that's something that happens in the real world.
Definitely. Great. So the last question I have for you, Sune, is, if our listeners take away one thing from our conversation today, what do you hope it would be?
Yeah, one thing that's I would maybe say two things. I would say, first of all, kind of figure out why you're doing this and focusing on the important matters, preventing financial crime, right? And then secondly, just get started. Don't take small steps if needed, instead of waiting for the big step over a long time.
Awesome. So thank you again, Sune, for the fascinating conversation and for sharing your insights on the evolution of KYC and screening, for the work you do and the team at Avallone are doing to make financial crime prevention more effective and efficient. And for our listeners who want to learn more about Avallone and Sune's work, you can visit avallone.com or connect with Sune directly on LinkedIn. If you enjoyed this episode, please subscribe to the Network for Financial Crime Prevention. As I mentioned, we're on Spotify and Apple and also YouTube. And visit us on nfcp.info to learn more about our network, resources, upcoming events, how to become a member, all that good stuff. And, we're building a community dedicated to collaboration, innovation, and knowledge sharing in the fight against financial crime. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay informed, be brave, and keep pushing the boundaries of what's possible in compliance and financial crime prevention. This has been the Network for Financial Crime Prevention podcast. Thanks again, Sune.
Thank you.